This is Rhett Read Podcast.
We take a deep dive into the Fear Street series
And review other books we've read.
I'm Serge.
And I'm Anna.
We're happy you can join us.
Welcome back, Rhett Readers.
Yes, and it's another exciting episode of Rhett Read Podcast. We're going to review Fear Street Super Chiller Silent Night 2. What a mouthful, but before we get into that, we have a couple other things we want to talk about.
Why don't you start us off with an arc you just finished?
The title of the book is Evolutions, 15 Myths That Explain Our World. The author is Oren Harman.
The publication date for it is June 12th of 2018.
And if you read the blurb for this book, you might kind of understand why I was so excited about it. As you guys may or may not have noticed, I've been really into mythology pretty much the entire time that we've had this podcast. I've been reviewing books of myths and legends from various places around the world. And even when I'm reading other kinds of books, I do try to tie it back to my knowledge of mythology, partly because it's one of the few things I know, but another part of it is I honestly do really enjoy it. So when I saw this book, which is billed as kind of a mythology for the modern scientific age, I thought, oh, that's really cool. Somebody actually wanted to come up with a new mythology, and they were going to take science as the basis for it. It seems like a really, really ambitious idea. If I was an author, maybe I'd try to do it. Having read the book, I will probably not be doing that if I ever become an author, because you immediately see this is a very difficult enterprise and hard to pull off right, and unfortunately, I don't think Oren quite pulled it off. It was lacking certain things. Let's just break it down a little bit. The myths themselves, there's, like it said in the subtitle, there's 15 of them. There are some good ones, but there's also some that are really big misses for me. So, for example, the creation myths for the Big Bang, it was pretty good. It's a nice little pop science kind of brief history of time, but made into a myth where the photons and the electrons and the quarks, they're all kind of personified. That's kind of cool. I like that. I like the formation of the solar system and the formation of the Earth and Moon. They're nice. There's still a little bit something there where it still kind of reads like a pop science book. Nothing wrong with that, but if you've already read a few of those, or if you've read some of the scientific literature, it's all very familiar to you. The difference, the angle of approach to subject matter doesn't lend too much new anything to it, really, to make it that interesting. What I really didn't like about this book was when it later got into the biological myths. The one that really got me going was probably somewhere in the multicellular stage of evolution. And the guy starts to bring in 19th century scientists into the story. And it's like, come on, this is supposed to be a myth about the evolutionary stages that our universe, specifically life on Earth at this point, have gone through. And you're starting to talk about the history of science. Just stop it. I don't want to hear about some guy and his graduate assistant who discovered how embryos form. I don't care. That's not relevant to the myth. It's just not the right place to put that information. I'm really glad that you're inspired by that story, but chuck it out. It doesn't belong here. And then later, when the book has a myth about how life evolved from water-based life to a land-based life. So this is the whole Darwin fish. One of the key areas of the theory of evolution, how do you come from a fish to an amphibian, right? How do you come from something that swims around and has fins and gills to something that walks and has lungs? It's one of the most fascinating aspects of the evolution of life. And if you're going to write a book called Evolutions, then you should maybe try to work in natural selection somewhere in one of your evolutions myths. And what better place to write about natural selection than one of the key steps of the evolutionary process when vertebrate animal life kind of made it out of the water and onto the land. The guy blows it. There's nothing in there about natural selection. The evolution is almost Lamarckian, and then the fish's shoulders got wider, and the fins turned into legs, and the fingers grew out. It's like you're almost talking about a single individual just adapting to a new environment, when we know that's not what happens. Species adapt. Over time, natural selection allows that to happen, and there's nothing in there about that, and I got so angry. If you want to write a mythology for the scientific age, great. but why abandon one of the central pillars of biology? Natural selection makes no appearance anywhere in this book. This myth about vertebrate creatures making it onto land is just a freaking travesty. I was very disappointed. The second half of the book is all the references and citations for every single myth, and then that actually really, honestly, and truly does read like a popular science book. And that part is pretty well written, and maybe this guy should have just written a popular science book instead of what he was trying to do. And maybe he could have put in little poems or myths in each chapter instead of doing it the other way around, where the myths are the main thing, and then everything else comes in references at the back. It's a very ambitious attempt, and, I have to commend Oren for that, but his book is a miss for me. It just didn't sit well.
Well, is it because of that one particular story that it didn't sit well? I mean, how early on in the short stories or mythologies did that come in?
Well, right off the bat, in the introduction, I didn't really like his pretentious writing style. It's just way too wordy and flowery. I can get like that sometimes, but if it's annoying me, it's probably going to annoy most everybody.
Well, I've taken a look at some of your previous mythology books that you have read, and it seems like a lot of those are very cut and dry. They tell you the story. They don't really add much purple prose to it.
Yes.
And when you were reading excerpts from this book, as you were reading it, it sounded very ornate.
I do have to say, though, a lot of his myths were like myths should be, where it is kind of cut and dry and there's not too much flowery language. It's all of the surrounding things, like the prologue and the epilogue, those things. That's where he gets way out of hand. The myths themselves don't stray too much into that. That is the one good point. I mean, this guy's clearly read a lot of myths and knows what the formula is and how it goes.
If we want to not talk about the prologue, epilogue, anything else, of the 15 myths, how many of the myths do you think were good?
I would say about 4 or 5.
Do you have issues with the 10 other stories? Is your issue more on the lack of science and the poor portrayal, or is it more the writing? Because I know you are very firm in your science, and when things stray too far from what is known, that really gets under your skin, like in The Martian and whatnot. So is that something that really bothered you here?
No, he didn't really goof up anything like that. It was just the way he portrayed it. And again, as far as the writing style goes, the ones that really ground my gears were the ones where he really departs from the myth structure. Again, I don't want to hear about the history of science behind something. He was talking about pterodactyls, and he brought in Lockheed Martin and Northrop Grumman and fighter jets. Why? Stop tying that in. I don't care. I don't care about the B-2 bomber and the F-29 stealth fighter or whatever. It doesn't matter to me. Tell me more about the pterodactyls. Why is the flying reptile myth all about human invention of airplane designs and stuff like that? Maybe I just don't get it. Maybe somebody out there is going to read this and think it's a work of genius and just an utter masterpiece, and I just totally missed it. I haven't rated this book on Goodreads yet, but I'd probably be giving it 2 stars out of 5. I didn't like it. I can't recommend it. I'll give it 2 stars for effort because this guy clearly put in a good effort. His mind's in the right place. This is an important work that should be attempted again by somebody else or maybe by him in a revised edition. But this particular one should not have been published.
Well, thanks for that review.
Yes, and I'm sure the author thanks me as well. Hey there, Oren. Hope you're doing fine.
I'm going to do a quick review of a book. It's called Only Human. It's by Sylvain Neuvel. We got this book courtesy of NetGalley and the publisher, Random House Publishing Group. If you've listened to our podcast, you know that I reviewed the previous books in this trilogy before, Sleeping Giants and Waking Gods. Only Human is the 3rd book in the trilogy. Obviously, it's the conclusion. So I was a big fan of the first 2 books. I think I gave them 3-4 stars. Kind of schlocky, action, giant robots, aliens. Think Pacific Rim.
Dun-dun-dun, dun-dun-dun.
Going into this book, I didn't know what to expect. The author either does what he needs to do and gives you a satisfying conclusion, or he just fails. It's very different from the first 2 books. It's still dossier style, but unlike the first 2 books, which was very action-packed throughout, dealt with some geopolitics, this book really goes into the geopolitics. If you're looking for the big robot alien fights of the previous book, you're not really going to find it here. This book takes place 9 years after the previous book. If you haven't read the previous book, I won't spoil it, but something happens there, and now we're 9 years later. So you get the same core cast of characters as the previous books. You really, really, really learn a lot about them, which, if you think about it, that was lacking in the previous book, so okay. But you really get a lot of geopolitics, and you get a lot of what the author's politics are. You know, it's a little preachy, and sci-fi has always been a medium that people have used to preach. If you watch any of the Star Treks, any incarnation of Star Trek, there is a message there. You watch Black Mirror, there's a message there. That's what sci-fi is about. Some do a better job of hiding that within the story, and some make it very obvious that this is what I think, and I'm going to say it. Think Heinlein. If you look at Starship Trooper, this is my opinion of what I think of this topic, and I'll throw some characters in it who espout my theories. That's kind of what this book felt like. It was very much an author letting you know what his thoughts were with his characters. It did tie in with the previous stories. It does sort of wrap things up a little bit, but if you are looking for the action that we saw in previous books, you're going to be a little disappointed.
So there's like no robot fights at all?
There are fights, but it's not as much. There's a character named Catherine Lebedev. She's a Russian. She's maybe one of the villainous type characters. If she had a mustache to twirl, I'm sure she would have been twirling it the entire time. It was not a well-created character, and that was a little disappointing because, you know, the other characters, while not necessarily the best developed, still had a core of being a normal human, whereas she just felt very contrived and felt like she was thrown there to be a roadblock, and it just wasn't fun to read because when you have someone that's that obvious, just somebody that's supposed to make trouble for others, it doesn't quite work, and I felt that was a problem. So one thing I do need to say about Only Human is that I don't think it's a book that you can read on its own. It's very much the last book of a trilogy. You can't read this book without reading the first one. You can't read this book without reading the second one. I don't think it's a book that you can just go to a bookstore and get and just enjoy. I think that you might not enjoy it because you don't have the background from the first two books. If you've already invested yourself in Sleeping Giants, Waking God, these first two books, you should read this book. It does what it needs to do. I give it a 3 out of 5.
So you still liked it in the end?
I think that this is the thing. If you agree with the author's message, you're probably going to be more prone to like this book than if you don't agree with his message.
Is there going to be a 4th book at all, or does this kind of wrap everything up?
Well, it's a trilogy, but nothing's stopping anyone from writing more, right? For instance, Harry Potter was pretty well wrapped up, and now we have The Cursed Child, and all of a sudden we have like 3 Fantastic Beasts movies. You can never say, oh, it's all wrapped up, it's done.
What do you think the chances are for this series to be turned into like a movie?
Never say never. I can see it being optioned. The thing is, I don't think a dossier movie would ever work. It would end up being like World War Z. Well, no, because I guess this has a core cast of characters. Maybe with a good director it'd be okay, but I wouldn't hold your breath.
I think it's time we take our intermission.
After the intermission, we're going to talk about Fear Street Super Chiller, Silent Night 2.
Welcome back. It's time to get right into the prediction accuracy for Fear Street Super Chiller Silent Night 2.
I didn't do too badly. I didn't do too well. I did okay. I said that Reva Dalby is back and someone is out to get her because she must have rubbed someone the wrong way and most likely deserves what she has coming for her.
Yeah, that wasn't really the motivation, though.
I said she's back in Shadyside for a school break because, if you recall, she was going off to college at the end of the last book.
Right.
I said that a guy is out to get her. Someone will get hurt along the way because the killer might accidentally hurt someone while thinking that other person is Reva. That actually happened.
That's true.
And I said someone was going to get stabbed, and that didn't happen.
I didn't do super well either, but I think I did pretty good considering Anna's dry spell that she's been having with her predictions recently. By comparison, I had similar predictions. I said that Reva's gonna get whatever she has coming for her, which, okay, anybody could have seen that coming. Christmas season, and Reva Dalby is messing around, getting people jobs at Dalby's. That didn't happen. She doesn't get anybody any jobs at Dalby's. But she is pissing people at Dalby's off, which was the second half of that prediction. I also said that a guy will be creeping after Reva, trying to get revenge, but Reva will kill him by running him over with a car. So, no, Reva doesn't kill anyone by running them over with a car, but someone is trying to get revenge and creeping after Reva, so that was right on point. I also said there would be a female murderer, and it would be Reva. You know, she doesn't actually murder anyone. She's involved in, like, an accidental death. But I did say that the victim would be male, and a male does die in this book. It's the only death. So I'm going to give myself a pat on the back for that. That was, like, a pretty good 50-50 shot that I had there, and I took it, and I got it.
The plot synopsis is basically, Reva Dalby returns in another holiday special and teaches us the lesson on how being a truly awful person can save your life in the end.
Yes, and isn't that the lesson behind Christmas?
Let's just get into the characters.
Yeah, okay. Well, I would say that Reva Dalby almost needs no introduction, but we're gonna still go into it a little bit.
Well, she's still as Reva Dalby as the first book.
Yes.
But she is going through PTSD, as you can see from the events of last year. So just hearing the song Silent Night actually triggers flashbacks of the events from last year. She has problems walking through parts of Dalby's, and you can see that it actually did affect her. Another thing from last year is that she swore after last year's events that she would be a better person. The thing is, this year she's decided, it's not really my fault I act the way I do, it's everyone else's fault.
Yeah, and I think we saw that coming. When we discussed that little parting line at the end of the previous Silent Night book, neither one of us thought that she could keep up her nice act for very long, and here we are. She's right back in the swing of being Reva, and once again working in her dad's store, because he thinks that somehow it'll help her build character.
Well, that's not the craziest thought a parent could have, right? But one of the other reasons is that her little brother Michael was invited to St. Croix on vacation for holiday break. The family that invited Michael categorically did not want Reva to go with them. Reva also describes her dad, Robert Dalby. She describes him in a really creepy way. Basically, she describes him, and you figure out that he's a DILF,
Ooh.
Really hot for a 46-year-old.
Nice.
Alright, whatever.
I mean, good for him, because, think about it. He's running a successful business, a large business. This is not a small company that he's running here, and he's 46. She's 17? He must have been 29 when she was born. Dang. That's hard work, raising kids and, building a company and stuff. Which, come to think of it, maybe his dad actually started the business.
Well, there's 6 Dalbys all across the country, right?
Yeah.
And I think it went as far out as California or something, we figured.
Yeah, there's one in California, I believe.
So, it sounds like it's an old family business.
He still sounds like a really hardworking guy, really old-fashioned.
Listen, I like talking about DILFs as much as you do, but let's move on to the next character.
Okay, next we have Pam Dalby. She's Reva's beautiful, all-American, fresh-looking cousin who looks good even without makeup and lives on Fear Street.
As you might recall from the last book, her family has always had monetary problems. Well, they aren't much better.
Yeah, wait a second. So if her family has monetary problems, how come they're not rich if their grandfather founded the chain of stores? Wouldn't they inherit some of that money?
Well, it could be old aristocratic families back in the day. Only the eldest son gets stuff.
Yeah.
Well, maybe he wasn't the eldest son.
Right.
And Robert Dalby got everything.
Huh.
Or maybe Robert just stayed in the family business and the other one didn't.
Okay.
Or maybe they just used all their money and invested unwisely. Pam's mother was just laid off. Her father actually had to give up his drugstore and go work for someone else, which if you've seen the first season of 13 Reasons Why, that's kind of where that plot was going.
So Pam is now working in Dalby's stationery department, and she's currently dating Victor Diaz, who is quite a babe, working in the stockroom. He's a very handsome boy with straight black hair, pulled back in a short ponytail. He's got a broad, tanned forehead with intense dark eyes and a beautiful smile.
What's with how you read that description?
Well, just this enchanting character of Victor Diaz.
Next we got Paul Nichols, aka Prez, because he looks like Elvis Presley. He's got straight black hair with sideburns, Presley's dark romantic eyes with the famous Elvis sneer.
This guy could not be any more different from Reva. Reva went to college, and this guy dropped out of Waynesbridge High School 2 years ago during his junior year. He was 16 at the time, and he hasn't seen his parents since then. He ended up getting a job at Dalby's as a stockroom clerk. He kept that job for 2 years, but then, right before Christmas, he got caught shoplifting, and Mr. Dalby himself gave him a big old lecture right before firing him.
And obviously, because he was fired for shoplifting, he's been struggling to find a new job.
Right, he's really bitter about it too, even though he knew what the company policy was. It's a zero tolerance policy. He just kept stealing. That wasn't his first time either. But somehow he blames the store and Mr. Dalby for his misfortune.
Well, next up, we have Prez's girlfriend, Diane Morris, aka Rabbit. Her 2 front teeth poke out, and she's very self-conscious about that, but that's Prez's nickname for her anyways. She's got dyed white blonde hair with black roots. She felt mousy and plain beforehand before she dyed her hair. She's got gray blue eyes, and she's 17 years old. She graduated from Waynesbridge the previous June with a solid C average. She could have done better, but it was just impossible to study at her house because her parents were always drunk, they were always fighting, and she ended up spending most of her time in Paul's crap apartment.
Diane fantasizes about becoming big-time criminals with Paul. She's got these weird schemes where they're basically gonna come away with millions of dollars after doing some kind of weird heist that she saw in a movie.
She thinks of these weird schemes because it all comes down to, what do we have to lose? We already live in this crap apartment. We already can't pay rent. We already can't afford anything. We might as well go big or go home, or we don't even have a home. It sucks to be poor. It really does. And you kind of feel for her there. That's how desperate she was. Let's commit any crime. Let's just do anything. We can't get jobs. What else is there to do?
Really like the opposite of Reva's situation, where she has anything that she wants.
Yeah, she has a job, and she desperately does not want it.
Exactly.
Danny Nichols. He's Paul's hot-tempered, angry older brother. He's 25 years old. He constantly gets headaches, and when he gets headaches, he starts seeing red, and that makes him angrier and angrier. Very intense dude. He's the older, flabbier version of Prez, with a round face and puffy cheeks, and a big belly that bulges out from his clothing.
And so that rounds out our cast of characters.
This episode of Rhett Read Podcast is brought to you by Oud de Paix. Let them smell it on you.
And now let's get into the in-depth plot. Right off the bat, we are introduced to Paul and Diane. They're obviously having money problems, as we've already mentioned, and live in a crap apartment, and really have no hope to change their situation. But they have a plan to rob the Dalbys. You see, they were there once for a Christmas party, and there are a lot of antiques there. Paul decides to up the ante. After all, they know nothing about the antiques, and so who knows if they'll steal something worthwhile or just some crap. So why not steal Mr. Dalby's most precious possession, Reva? They'll ransom her for millions of dollars.
So we bounce over to Reva. Your first interaction with her involves her back behind the perfume counter, and I kind of low-key love her.
Low-key love her? Like the Norse god?
She is kind of full of mischief. She's the only one at the perfume counter, and a guy tries to get her attention because he needs to buy perfume for his wife. And Reva just says, you know what, I'm on my break, which pisses this guy off to no end because the store literally just opened. And Reva just goes, yeah, I don't make the schedules, basically sends this dude away. She just starts cackling to herself madly. And the supervisor comes over and goes, listen, you can't do that. I'm gonna tell your dad. And Reva's like, I don't care if you tell my dad, I don't want to be here. And then as she's saying this, she's thinking to herself, why is your makeup and clothing so awful? God, spend more time on your clothing than yelling at me.
And then as soon as the other counter girl arrives, Reva lets her know that it's been a super busy morning and goes on a break, with the other girl kind of just sputtering in protest.
So Reva goes off to distract Pam. As she's going there, she sees Pam talking to Victor and decides that she is into Victor. Pam and Reva start talking. Pam just goes on and on about how she's so lucky she just found her dream guy. Victor is totally the guy for her. And Reva's like, what about me? Look at my nails. Because every conversation with Reva has to be about Reva.
She says something to Pam. I forget what it was. It was like a question or something like that. And in response, Pam just grabs a letter opener and just stabs Reva like right in the throat.
JK, it's a prop letter opener.
It's a joke present, and apparently it's the biggest seller in the stationery department for Christmas.
That's a prank gone wrong for someone down the line. Do you remember that episode of Monk? There was supposed to be a stage knife, but instead someone put a real knife there.
Yeah.
That's what this is. You know, a Future Fear Street book.
Well, we already had somebody get stabbed with a letter opener.
That's true, and Broken Hearts.
Yep.
Reva doesn't actually think this is funny and decides to just peace out. And she goes to talk to her dad. And she just goes, Dad, I don't want to be here. This is wasting my time. Why am I here?
Her dad, he just wants her to have a good work ethic and maybe sort out her troubles from the previous year. He then bribes her with promise of a beach trip in February as long as she makes it through the holiday season.
And she obviously takes him up on his bribe. As she's leaving, her dad lets her know that the employee elevators are having some trouble, so don't use them. And we tell you this now because it's a plot point down the line.
So Reva heads home after talking to her dad, and she's a little bit paranoid because she's certain that somebody's following her.
And guess what? She's right.
It was Prez. Prez meets up with Diane at Freddy's in the old village to go over the plan. He's actually been following Reva all week to get her route down.
Mr. Dalby leaves promptly at 7 a.m. every day. Princess Reva leaves around 9, or sometimes later.
The maid usually arrives 10 minutes after Reva leaves, and there's a guard dog on a chain who is unleashed at night.
Well, now that they have the routine down, they are going to kidnap her tomorrow.
Yes, and now kidnapping day is here. Dalby leaves right on schedule, and the plan is that Diane will be the getaway driver while Prez goes in after Reva. First obstacle, the dog isn't on the chain. But it's okay because Prez has bacon, and as backup, doggy chloroform, and since the bacon doesn't work, the dog is knocked out. He goes inside and is unimpressed with the obscene wealth that he sees.
They have 2 fridges, big oil paintings, antique furniture. Screw them!
Second obstacle, sirens are heading towards the Dalby house. So I guess he must have tripped some kind of alarm.
Well, that's not something he would have been able to see from following Reva. Third obstacle, Reva's not there.
And the police are getting closer.
It's time to go.
Prez jumps into the car and Diane has to drive off as fast as she can.
They lick their wounds after their failed attempt, but they hatch up a new plan.
Yes, this time it's going to be foolproof. They are going to abduct Reva from work.
There aren't many people there first thing in the morning. Reva has the first shift before the other saleswoman comes in.
The perfume counter is right across from a side door that opens onto the street. So they just need to distract Reva and get her to step out from behind the counter, and then they can just grab her.
But they need to bring in Prez's brother Danny to be their getaway driver, because Diane needs to be the distraction and Prez needs to pull her out the door, so they need a third person to drive.
Reva actually had to go to work early with her dad since he needed to talk to her, and she had spent the previous night making out with Victor, aka Pam's boyfriend, which I guess is why she wasn't home.
Pam comes by and talks about how excited she is to have Victor as a boyfriend and how she is in love.
Reva spends the entire time being Reva.
There's a brief moment where her Reva-ness almost comes off as caring for Pam. She thinks about Pam's really crap choice in boyfriends, but that lasts about a microsecond.
So now let's get into abduction attempt number 2. So Reva is driving her coworker completely insane.
She arrived 25 minutes late to work, and she's eating this super crumbly muffin. Crumbs are getting everywhere. She's dripping coffee everywhere. Her coworker has just wiped down the glass, and she is super pissed.
The whole counter is now crumbled and coffee cup ring stained, and the coworker storms off, leaving Reva by herself, ready to be abducted.
Well, here come Bonnie and Clyde.
Yes, so their master plan is having Diane pretend to lose a contact and getting Reva to come around the corner so Prez can grab her and then they can go.
Prez has been observing Reva for a week at this point. Somehow, after a week of watching her, he decided that Reva would be the type of person to go out of her way to help someone.
This is a big miscalculation on their part. Reva sees the two of them coming and immediately the Reva tape starts rolling inside her head. She thinks Prez is kinda hot, but Diane is short and shabbily dressed, plain, thin, with a bad dye job, and she generally just sees the two of them as losers.
I'm so nasty, she thought, feeling very pleased with herself. She glanced up to see the 2 tacky teenagers approaching her. Why don't they go shoplift in some other department, she thought coldly. You go to Diane and Prez starting their act and... My contact, the girl cried from down on the floor. I dropped my contact lens. Reva took a long sip of coffee. Help me! I can't see a thing, the girl cried shrilly. Leaning on the counter, Reva glanced down. The girl was on her hands and knees, running a hand over the black and white squares of tile. The boy suddenly stepped up in front of her, his raincoat still draped over one arm. He's kind of good-looking, Reva thought. I like those dark, smoldering eyes. Can somebody help me? The girl called from the floor. She had crawled between the perfume counter and the side door to the store. I can't see a thing. Reva, pretending not to hear, lowered her head, trying to hide under the floppy hat. She busied herself, straightening the sleeves of her cashmere sweater. Can you help us, the boy asks. I don't have my glasses with me. I'm as blind as she is. Reva took another sip of coffee before answering. Sorry, I'm on my break. I can't find it, the girl called. Couldn't you come out and help us, the boy pleaded. It'll only take a second. Reva set down the cup. Sorry, I'm not allowed to leave my post.
Reva just proceeds to, ignore them as best she can. Ends up claiming that she's actually on her break. Prez just loses his cool, can't take this anymore, grabs Reva from the counter, and just, starts hauling her out towards the door. But just then, Reva's supervisor actually shows up, causing Diane and Prez to just give up and run away and leave. Reva's supervisor tries to berate Reva for being late. It's like water off a duck's back.
It's Reva, everybody. She doesn't care.
She didn't even notice she was being kidnapped. She was just trying to avoid doing work.
So you cut to Prez, Diane, and Danny. Danny just wants Prez and Diane to kill Reva.
To which they reply that they're not going to get any money if they kill her. It's just a way to show Danny's hot temper. He also keeps making fun of Prez for failing twice in a row.
The geniuses hatch up another plan. Reva has seen both Prez and Diane, so Danny has to be the one grabbing her. They're gonna grab Reva when she's in the stockroom from 3 to 5, and they'll split the ransom 3 ways.
Later that night with Reva, she's getting a phone call from Pam. Pam is very upset that Victor has been off lately.
Reva starts toying with Pam just to see if she can keep upsetting her. She insinuates that Victor has been checking her out, and she finds Victor attractive.
Then she lets it drop that she knows that Victor has broken 2 dates with Pam, even though Pam only let her know about the 1 date. Pam starts freaking out, and Reva kind of just hangs up on her.
And after she hangs up,
you find out that Victor's actually hanging out with Reva right then and there, and then they start making out.
Switch over to Bonnie and Clyde +1. Prez got himself arrested for fighting and beating someone up because he is a genius.
Predictably, his parents refused to bail him out, and now they need the money more than ever.
The plan is now to get Reva tomorrow. Danny's gonna hide in the storeroom, and Diane will be the getaway driver.
Attempt number 3. 3rd time's a charm, right guys?
Danny is hiding in the stockroom. He's got a headache. The headache makes him angry. He sees red, which makes him even angrier. He calls it his red anger.
After a bit of waiting, the victim finally comes in. He throws a wool coat on her, and she struggles for a bit. Losing his patience, Danny finally just ends up knocking her out and dragging her into the car.
Diane is once again not a very cool-headed getaway driver. The whole time, she's just worried, constantly worried that they're going to get caught. And unfortunately, she parked in a no parking zone, and a uniformed cop just tells her to leave. But luckily for her, there's some ruckus in the parking lot that gets the cop's attention, and just as he leaves, Danny's back.
After waiting a whole day to let Dalby stew and worry about the missing Reva, they're finally going to make that call for the ransom and make their millions. Robert Dalby is having a nice glass of sherry while reading the Wall Street Journal when he gets the call. They ask for $1 million to give Reva back.
Mr. Dalby has no clue what he's talking about because Reva is literally sitting right next to him. Whoops.
Whoopsie-daisy.
It's Pam! They got Pam! It's always Pam!
Bad luck Pam, right? Bound, gagged, and blindfolded. Pam overhears them talking about how they wanted Reva. Now everything's all effed up. But make lemons out of lemonade. They want to see if Pam is maybe also a little rich girl.
Hint, she's not.
When they find out she's a Dalby, they're super excited. Until they found out she's the poor cousin that Mr. Dalby wouldn't spend a cent for.
Might as well kill her.
So now we're going to switch back to Reva. She's on the phone with Victor.
You find out that the FBI has no clue who took Pam. And Mr. Dalby doesn't actually believe in paying kidnappers because he feels like it encourages other kidnappers. And he has such strict principles about this that he's already gone to his next business trip.
Victor feels guilty about the kidnapping. He was with Reva instead of Pam during the kidnapping. What happened was Reva kind of sent Pam off to cover her stockroom shift so that she could monopolize Victor somehow.
Reva doesn't care about this conversation at all. She wants to be talking about her. So she just talks about how it could have been her who was kidnapped. And she plays this up with Victor.
But her internal thoughts are all about how she likes it better when Victor is worried about her. And sucks to be Pam, but surely she'll be okay.
She also thinks about how she's realized that even though Victor is really good looking, he's basically a very low wattage dim bulb in the brain, and she's kind of bored with him.
The call is interrupted by some sounds outside. On her driveway is Pam.
So after calling the police and the FBI to let them know where Pam is, Reva and Pam chat.
and Pam says that the kidnappers kept her blindfolded, and she doesn't know what they look like. And she doesn't know their names because they used like aliases and didn't call each other by their actual names the whole time.
The guy wanted to kill her. The girl was too scared to kill her. They argued for hours. And they finally decided to dump her and leave as quickly as possible and go crash with a friend in Toronto.
Just then, Victor shows up to Reva's house because he was worried about Reva, but is super psyched to see Pam. Reva's just happy that she doesn't have to deal with Victor anymore, and also that Pam is really naive and doesn't know the real reason that Victor is there.
The next day involves Reva shopping at the Division Street Mall, and she's being followed by a guy that looks like Elvis. She thinks she's being paranoid at first, but she sees this guy in every store she goes to. She goes in and out a few stores a few times, and he follows her, and she kind of realizes that maybe she's not wrong.
Later at work, Reva is doing her typical bang-up job, being rude to customers and all that, and slacking off.
Making snide comments.
Yeah. Pam comes over to chat. She's back at work because she couldn't take any more time because she actually needs the money. Apparently, the Dalby department store doesn't have like a kidnapping paid leave policy. Pam invites Reva over to help trim the Christmas tree. It'll be a banging good time.
Reva only agrees because she actually feels a little guilty about everything, and she knows she'll be bored at it, but she'll make the sacrifice.
Reva arrives at Pam's with Christmas presents for Pam and her parents.
Pam seems pretty happy to see her. She opens the door and goes, "Hey," and Reva's, coming up the walkway, and suddenly she sees someone come from around the corner of the house.
A blanket is thrown over her, she is thrown into a car, and Pam is as well. 'Cause why not? Pam is just a hard luck kid.
Pam and Reva do try to put up a fight, but they don't stand a chance.
Was it Reva that actually makes that older guy bleed?
Yes.
Anyway, the three musketeers finally succeeded, and Reva is in their possession. And Pam. Reva lets her imagination run wild about all the awful ways that they'll end up killing her. But surely they'll just take the money and let them go, right?
Things don't look that good, since Danny keeps talking about how he wants to torture her and kill her.
He's already got his murder headache going. Her breaking his nose certainly didn't help.
For some absurd reason, they decide to take the hostages to Dalby's.
The closer we are to danger, the further we are from harm. It's the last thing they'll expect.
They are also just completely incapable of not calling each other by their real names.
To make matters worse for themselves, they take the blindfolds off their hostages.
This seems like a really dumb idea. At this point, Reva has already figured out that they're in Dalby's, just by the smell, by the sound of how their footsteps are, which I'm actually surprised Reva would figure all that stuff out, but she's not a dumb girl, so she already figured out she's in Dalby's. By taking off her blindfold, they have just removed every single disadvantage that she had, because she knows this place better than anyone.
Yeah, that's true. This is like such a bungled kidnapping attempt.
Well, their reasoning was, if we take off their blindfolds, we'll get them to move to where we want to go faster. Why does time matter?
Yeah, it doesn't matter because it's after hours at Dalby's. If it did matter and there were people around, then this wouldn't be a good time to go to Dalby's anyway. I'm assuming they did like the bare amount of research to go in way after hours where there wouldn't be anyone there, and then there's no hurry.
There's a security guard, but they should have figured out his route and the timing of his route, so it wouldn't really matter how much time necessarily it took. The girls are walking, it's not like they've jelly-legged.
Yeah, this doesn't make any sense, but I think ever since they added Danny to their number, their plans just keep getting worse and just dumber. Reva recognizes Prez and Diane and obviously makes some judgment on her three captors, because she's Reva. While she's running her internal insult monologue, she also starts making demands and arguing with them. This is not really a good move because Danny is in like a really shit mood, so he just up and breaks Reva's arm, which causes her to black out.
Reva wakes up to find herself tied and gagged in a storage room. So the three musketeers are going to call Mr. Dalby and leave the hostages in the storeroom, and they figure someone will find them in a day or two.
Just as Diane is about to go off to call Dalby, Pam asks Diane to untie her. After all, this wasn't part of their deal.
Dun dun dun.
Oh snap, wait, Pam's in on this? What's going on?
Pam made a deal with the captors the first time around. Let her go, and she'll help them capture Reva. She didn't want money. She just wanted to teach Reva a lesson. She was pissed at Reva for sneaking around with Victor behind her back. She was able to figure that out. And then she was kidnapped because of Reva, which put her in an even more foul mood. And then to add insult to injury, Mr. Dalby would not pay for her ransom.
Right, and then she almost got killed.
The last point was, Reva broke her promises from last year, and now she has to pay. Enough is enough.
Obviously, the captors could give zero shits about their deal, and Danny slaps Pam across the face for good measure, just to let her know, shut up. The captors make their call to arrange the money drop-off and leave their victims in the now locked storage room.
Pam apologizes to Reva. Reva apologizes to Pam, and then they decide they need to escape.
Pam wasn't tied that tightly, and manages to actually untie herself and then untie Reva. When Prez comes back to, quote-unquote, take care of them, they actually end up running out of the room, right past them. They kind of hid in the corner, so when he comes in, he kind of walks in the middle of the room, sees the empty chairs and the ropes lying there. Oh, crap, what happened? Meanwhile, they're in a corner. They're already behind him, so they just run out the door before he can catch them.
There's a chase sequence. Pam and Reva split up. The captors split up chasing them. Prez is running after Reva. Danny and Diane are going after Pam. And then somehow Pam and Reva just bump into each other, and there's no one behind them.
They're actually in this really creepy area of the store where there's mannequins all over the place.
It's like that episode of Doctor Who. It's called Rose. It's the first episode of the first season of the reboot.
So they finally run to the back where the employee elevators are, but Reva hopes that maybe she could trick their captors into stepping into one of the broken elevator shafts.
They're on the 5th floor.
Right, so that would be like a fatal fall. And this is going back to her dad told her earlier, don't go in there, it's broken.
Reva and Pam are hiding behind a pillar. Prez and Diane go into this elevator that's on the left-hand side, and Reva's celebrating like, yes, they're dead! And then they come out again. Guess the elevator's fixed.
Oh, right, so what they did was they pressed the elevator button, and then they sent the elevator down to make it look like they had gone down. So then Prez and Diane see that the elevator went down, and they try to go in there to go after them. Is that what happens?
They see an elevator, and they said they must have taken the elevators because the lights on the elevator are running.
Oh, they see the elevator coming up. Okay, and they don't see the glowing up button because they're stupid.
And then what happens is Diane figures out they didn't have enough time to go down. We were hot on their tail. They must still be up here. This must be a trick.
We know at least the elevator on the left works. Prez and Diane run off to go find Reva and Pam. Meanwhile, Reva and Pam decide to take the now fixed elevator back down.
They're desperately pushing that elevator button. Prez and Diane actually see them. They're racing back. Pam and Reva are like, oh my god, why is this elevator not coming? And just as the door opens for the elevator,
they're about to jump into the elevator, but there's someone there jumping out with a gun drawn.
FBI.
Mr. FBI man goes after Prez and Diane and takes the girls to stay put. Pam and Reva kind of celebrate, yeah, we're safe. But then here comes Danny.
Pissing on their parade with his silver pistol.
Danny goes to shove Reva into the right-hand side elevator that has just opened. Pam attacks Danny and manages to get the gun away from him. And at this point, he's just done. It's too much trouble. He's never gonna get the girls. He's wanted to kill them this whole time and he hasn't even been able to kill them. He just wants to get away. So with that in mind, he jumps into the open elevator door to make his escape.
With a loud groan, he jumped up quickly and lumbered into the open elevator. Reva shut her eyes tight. She heard Danny scream all the way down. The scream ended 4 floors below in a sickening splat. It was a sound Reva knew she would never forget.
The elevator on the left opens up again, and out come 4 more FBI agents.
Prez and Diane are taken into custody. When Reva asks how they knew that they were in Dalby's, it turns out the Dalby family has caller ID, so the FBI knew to go to the department store. And when they got to the department store, an FBI agent noticed that the elevator was being called, so they figured out that everyone's on the 5th floor.
Yeah, that's the Mr. Sherlock Holmes that jumped out of the first elevator that came up.
Pam and Reva are brought to the hospital, and they're reunited with their parents and Victor, who goes to give Pam a big hug. And wouldn't you know, there's a song playing on the loudspeakers.
Silent night, holy night. Okay, I'm not gonna sing anymore. Sorry, guys. Blood coming out your ears, right? With that in mind, a word from our sponsors.
Eau de peur.
Eau de peur.
Eau de peur.
Fear Street Mythos.
Serge looked up the origin of the name Dalby.
I was pretty fascinated by the Dalbys. I was wondering if there was any connection with Fear, because Fear was, I guess, a successful businessman, although people didn't really know where his money came from, and he kind of started a family dynasty in Shadyside, and the Dalbys do have some similarity. You know, there's Mr. Dalby, who's well off, and then he has a daughter. We know Fear had a daughter. Anyway, the point is, there's no connection. I ended up trying to see if the word Dalby, means fear in, any human language that I could find, and that was not the case. But I did find the origins of the name Dalby. It means valley village in Norse. Dal means valley, which is also the case in English, like dale. A dale is a small valley.
Rivendell.
Yeah, like Rivendell or
Riverdale.
I also know some Slavic languages, and it's the same in Slavic as well. Dalina could mean a valley. And then B means village. There's actually a whole bunch of villages and towns in Sweden. The one I could think of where I was living for a while was called Täby. Okay, that makes sense, B. And then if you go to England, in northern England, there's a lot of areas that were conquered by Vikings, and Vikings had settled. There's actually 3 villages called Dalby, which is where people named Dalby in England come from. But you can also think of other English town names that end in B. One can surmise that those are probably also old Viking villages. Other Fear Street Mythos type stuff, the Ohio Shadyside theory gets a little bit more credence. The outlaws were going to escape to Toronto.
I thought Schwab theory had us in different worlds. Are we in the world that Shadyside is in Ohio right now?
I believe that's the primary Shadyside. Most of these books seem to be set in such a way. This one, possible, for example, from around the Cleveland vicinity, which is central North Ohio. It's 4 hours or so to get to Toronto. Obviously, there's lots of parts of Ohio where it's closer, some where it's further. If this was Massachusetts or the Northeast, they would be fleeing to Montreal.
Wouldn't Windsor be closer than Toronto for Ohio?
The one that's right across from Detroit?
Yeah.
It is closer from Cleveland. No one's really heard of Windsor. We grew up around Lake Erie. You grew up on 2 different sides of it.
So I'm from Michigan. That's what it is.
So you'd be thinking Windsor, but I guarantee you most people have heard of Toronto, and not too many have heard of Windsor. If you're talking Eastern Ohio, you might as well drive to Toronto. The other thing is, I think last time we read a Silent Night book, we were amazed by the quick police response to the Dalby department store. It was basically instantaneous. And once again, we do see a pretty tight police presence around the store. There's a police patrol around the back of the store that catches the getaway vehicle.
I did notice that it was police officer, because when I was first writing the outline, I had written security guard, and then I looked at the book again, and it specifically said uniformed cop. And
yes.
I was like, that's odd.
Not only do they have a quick response time to that store, but they're also patrolling around that store.
There's got to be some important things coming off those shipments.
Last time we did suspect that maybe there was something about this store that was somehow tied to the operation going on around the Fear Street area. The other interesting thing is that the police response is much slower to the Dalby residence. So it's not necessarily anything involved with Mr. Dalby himself that's causing the police presence at his store. It's not him or his personal security or his family's security that is the concern here. It's something about the store specifically. Those are just a couple of the things that we noticed. There's not too much going on, although...
I was thinking about the loop we were talking about from the previous book.
Okay.
So Silent Night 1 takes place before that loop resets.
Yes.
We're supposed to think that only 1 year has happened between Silent Night and Silent Night 2. Are we just going to assume these books take place in their own little... If you go by the school years that happen between the books Silent Night 1, Silent Night 2, there are a lot of school years.
Yeah, between Silent Night 1 and Silent Night 2, probably 3 or 4 years have already passed. So the first Silent Night book takes place during what are plausible original Corey years, aka years where had Corey started as a freshman in New Girl, he might still be in Shadyside. Since then, probably 3 or 4 years have passed. We actually kind of lost count, but definitely this book, chronologically being the year after that one, it would have to be a flashback book to the previous time loop, if you want to look at it that way. That's the way I'd look at it. This book wasn't really mythos heavy, but it does continue to set up the Dalbys, and I do hope that they remain a major part of Fear Street for years to come.
There is a Silent Night 3.
I'm looking forward to it. We are also looking forward to some books that promise to be very mythos heavy coming up very soon.
Well, before we tease that, Callbacks.
Obviously, the Dalby clan, the mention of the events that previously happened in Silent Night 1.
There's not many other callbacks. It is just focusing on Reva and her vortex of Reva.
Right. What I was going to say is Fear Street isn't even really mentioned here.
She is kidnapped from Fear Street.
Oh, that's right, because Pam lives on Fear Street, of course. How could we forget? 90s things.
Sassy Magazine, Reva's reading it. That was a 90s thing.
Maybe the Elvis thing is a 90s thing.
There's some hipsters that might like Elvis. I don't really know. I was not an Elvis person in the 90s, so...
Maybe kids that are into old kidnapping movies also know about Elvis.
Was he in kidnapping movies?
No, but I think of a kidnapping movie, I think like an old black and white flick. I guess now people just watch Taken. Okay, never mind. Other thing about the 90s is that you're just gonna call from like a blocked cell phone number if you're gonna make a hostage situation. You're not gonna be calling from Dalby's department store, which is obviously gonna show up on the caller ID. Nobody would do that nowadays.
They weren't the brightest bulbs in the box. I'm pretty sure they would just use their cell phones and forget to like do anything to it.
Yeah, you just get one of those like...
burner phones.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, those are the 90s things. Do you have any nitpicks? Because this book was pretty much a masterpiece. I'm not sure there's much to nitpick here.
I mean, the nitpicks would just be like how awful the plans were thought out, but like I said, not the brightest bulbs, not the sharpest crayons.
Yeah, I don't have much to nitpick here.
Well, let's just go into thoughts on the book then.
Yeah, let's just talk about this book. There's a lot of good things to say about this book.
Honestly, like, Reva might be the worst. You would never want to interact with someone like her. You don't want to meet anyone like her. If someone like her was in your life, you would just want to throttle her. But there is some joy reading Reva. She is everyone's id. She is the worst possible person. And I just got so much joy reading her this time around that for some reason I didn't get last time.
Yeah, we hated her last time.
But I think it's because last time she was the one causing all this pain for Pam and these other kids that she interacted with. There were people who wanted jobs. She wouldn't help them get jobs. And she was just making other people's lives. She was hurting people that were close to her.
Right.
And that was just really hard to read.
Yeah.
But this time around, her Reva-ness is what kept helping her out.
Yeah, that scene where she's getting kidnapped from the store and she's just giving her standard Reva treatment, like, I'm on a break, I'm just gonna sip my coffee and ignore you while in my head making fun of how you look. It's such a well-written scene.
It's hilarious. It's one of those scenes where, you know how after you watch a movie or read a book, the good books, the good movies will have a scene that sticks out. Like, we just watched Event Horizon and I saw this one scene that I loved and I just think about it every now and then, and you reference it. And I honestly have been thinking about this scene since I read it weeks ago. And I still laugh about it. Like, sometimes it'll just pop in my head, and then I'll just laugh to myself about it. That's how much that scene resonated with me.
Yeah, and that's the power of creating, like, a memorable character. This book definitely benefits from Silent Night 1 setting up the character of Reva to begin with. Now that we're familiar with her, and that setup is behind us, now we see her again. And clearly Arlstein knows how to write her, has gotten inside her head, has figured her out, and it's just, the results are really good. I want to ask you, we were just discussing, like, why we hated her in the previous book, and why she's just funny now, and she is really cruel still, but a lot of her cruelty, like, she keeps inside in her inner monologue, so do you think her effort to, like...
No, she doesn't. No. She says a lot of it to people, they just don't hear it.
Okay.
She, like, literally tells people that they smell or they look bad, but because she sort of mumbles it, you know, Seinfeld calls it the low talker.
Right, so do you think she's actually, like, better than before? Like, a better person? Or do you think she's equally as bad as she's always been?
I think she's equally as bad as she's always been.
Okay.
Like, I think we've all had moments where we've just wanted to just unleash the beast, but we can't, and here's this person who is just doing it. And right. I think there's something there.
Is Reva the one that can whistle to make her dog, like, go for the kill?
Yes.
Oh my god. Right, I remember, like, her boyfriend in the last book tried to get back with her. She just started whistling for the dog.
He didn't try to get back with her. He said that, listen, I know we broke up. I'm not trying to get back together. I just really need this job.
Oh, yeah, and she whistled the dog on him.
I had fun with Reva this book. I know she's an awful human being, and I was thinking about this the other day. In Broken Hearts, we had a character, Josie, who was kind of Reva-esque. She was very blunt. She was very mean to her sisters and her friends. R.L. Stine explained it to us. She was really reeling from her sister's horrific accident.
Yeah, she watched her sister nearly die and become permanently mentally disabled and blamed herself for it.
Yeah, and that's something very, very compelling, and I thought that gave her character incredible depth. And I really liked that he did that for her. But for some reason, he hasn't done that with Reva. You know, he's still just made her horribly rude, awful.
Well,
and he hasn't tried to explain that away.
Right. I mean, so you mentioned that made Josie's character very deep, and Reva's just very shallow, so...
But for some reason, like, I like the fact that he hasn't tried to give her an excuse.
Some people are just shallow, right?
Yeah, and it's just... I just find it interesting. Like, you know, I always complain when I was doing the review for Only Human. I'm like, well, she's like a mustache twirling villain.
Yeah.
Reva doesn't come off like that.
Yeah, I mean, her mom died, right?
But other characters had their parents die. I mean, every Disney character's had dead parents.
Well, we've had Fear Street characters have their parents die and then attempt to murder their sister.
That's true. For some reason, I just like that he hasn't tried to explain away why she is how she is. She just is how she is. And it's just really weird. I know that somehow it's hypocritical of me to think that.
Maybe it's just a stereotype of rich people. Just like going back to stereotyping poor people, once again we have a book where the poor people are the villains. We end up in the situation where one of the good guys, but the poor good guy, right, the poor cousin, ends up conspiring. Now, we understand why she did it. You know, she gives some explanation, but none is needed. Her life was in danger. She probably had to make a bargain just to get out of there alive. Now, why she didn't come to the FBI after that? Okay, that's on her. And again, it's the poor person that makes that choice. And what is with R.L. Stine's track record of poor people being the bad guys? It's almost like the poor people in the Fear Street world have no way out other than to turn to crime, and of course crime never pays. We just have this long string of poor baddies getting beaten.
Yes, Reva is one of those, when you think of someone who drips of privilege, who isn't taught how to be a good person, she thinks that she can treat anyone how she wants to treat them because she's rich. Her dad is everyone's boss, so why does it matter how she acts at work? She's never gonna get fired. So yeah, she is dripping with that entitlement and that privilege. Like I said, this is not a person that you want to meet in real life. This is a person in real life that you'd hate.
This train of thought helps me understand why we kind of like her, because unlike the main character in The Cheater, she doesn't pretend to be nice while being completely morally bankrupt and rotten on the inside. So she just lets her spoiled rich brattiness, you know, she wears it on her sleeve, and that's all there is to it. You end up in the situation where you have this murderous, evil, corrupt individual in The Cheater putting on a fake smile and pretending to be like a normal, nice person.
I do think you made an interesting point when you talked about Pam and how she is the poor good person. So even though she is still a victim throughout the book, she does conspire with the bad guys. And, you know, that sort of happened in the previous book too. Pam was someone who was treated like crap by her cousin. So she did end up conspiring with people to hurt Reva. Once again, we're bringing Reva and Pam up. Reva is a horrible human being. Pam, you know, you feel for her. Underneath her all-American sweet person is this person who can be equally evil. And I think I had compared her to Betty Cooper from Riverdale in our review of Silent Night 1. For some reason, R.L. Stine keeps trying to make Pam out to be this sad sack victim, this really good person. She always comes out disappointing you in the end. Whereas Reva, he never tries to sugarcoat her.
I can say that I definitely like this book a lot. I had a really good time reading it. How many Reva put-downs out of 5 would you give this book?
I think that I have to give this book 4 out of 5 Reva put-downs.
I would give this book, and again, I'm not rating this on a Fear Street scale. This is on my regular scale. I would give it 3 Reva put-downs out of 5. If you're just getting into Fear Street or you're thinking about it, you're not sure where to start, once again, this is one of those few books that you could probably pick up and enjoy. It's not bad. It's a lot of fun. It's a really quick read. You're not going to regret the waste of time that it took. It's not a huge time sink, and it's a great introduction to the series, and is just an all-around enjoyable ride that I could pretty much recommend to everybody.
I actually need to upgrade mine to 5 out of 5 Reva put-downs, because I just realized I'm still laughing and thinking about that scene where they first try to kidnap her from the store. Honestly, the amount of joy that scene has given me, I can't not give this book 5. Now that we're done with our Reva put-downs, it's time to talk about and make predictions for the next book that we're reading.
Get excited, everybody, because this is going to be major.
So we're actually going to explore the Fear Street Saga trilogy. The Fear Street Saga, Where the Terror Began, the betrayal.
Yeah, and you guys know me. I always talk about mythology, and so the saga is like a Norse myth and legend, so I'm all ready for the real deal Fear Street mythology. We've gotten 2 books in the past that have teased at it, and now this is the real meat of the story.
On the cover is this beautiful young woman. She's wearing this very ornate necklace and this old-fashioned dress. Behind her you see this massive fire. There's a gate, and I think it's the same young woman walking out. She's got a cloak. Obviously, we know that this is about the Fear family, and the fire in the background, we know that Simon Fear's house burned down. There's nothing I can say except the fact that I think there's going to be some witchcraft. Obviously, the fire, I think, is the Fear house burning down. The murder weapon, people are going to meet a fiery death. The murderer gender, I'm going to say female. And the murder victim, I'm going to say male, but I think that there's going to be a few dead bodies.
Alright, so now I am looking at the picture, and just like Anna described, there's a huge fire and a cloaked female figure creeping out, a beautiful wrought iron gate with the fire behind her. She's kind of sneaking out in the middle of the night, and then there's a close-up of a woman wearing the silver pendant with what appears to be like the blue clay mineral stones inset on it. That's going to be pretty exciting. Okay, so the plot is going to be the burning of the Fear mansion. Same prediction that Anna said. Murder weapon will be some kind of witchcraft fire blend. Murderer gender, I'm gonna say female. The murder victim gender will also be female. We know that Fear is supposed to have 2 daughters that die. I'm just gonna go with my foreknowledge of one version of this legend that I heard in the previous book and go with that his daughters will end up dead.
Well, we don't want to betray our initial thoughts from seeing the cover, so we're going to end it at that.
Alright, see you next time, and be excited because this is going to be a fun ride.
Thanks for listening.
Bye. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Rhett Read Podcast.
Join us again as we continue our journey down Fear Street.
We love hearing from you guys, so feel free to reach out to us at Rhett Read Podcast on Twitter and Facebook.
Email us at rhett.read.podcast@gmail.com.
Don't forget to like, rate, and subscribe.
Once again, thanks for listening. See you again soon.